With another phase of the offseason over, it's time for another 53-man roster prediction on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, every single day. I appreciate you all so very much. My hashtag everydayers. You guys make the world go around over here. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Today on the show, we're due. It's time for another 53-man roster. You all eat that up, okay? Here's your slot. It's another 53-man roster projection. And I figured this year, I really wanted to keep track. I didn't do that last year. I didn't keep very good track of the predictions that I was making and how they evolved over the course of the offseason. So I did one post-draft, like right after the draft, that you can go check out. It's a previous episode of this podcast. But now that we're post-OTAs, we've seen everybody a little bit. We've learned a little bit about injuries. We've learned a little bit about depth charts. We've got a couple of, weird sort of risers on the third team that are maybe going to sneak onto the roster. And last time we did this, the problem that I had was like the first 49 or 50 were really easy to put together. The next, the last 3 or 4 were really hard to figure out, not who to cut, but who to include. I think this is a year where the Vikings are going to include a lot of undrafted guys or futures guys. The types that you usually would think of as long shots to make the roster have a way better chance this year, just because the jobs are there. Nobody is really sitting on those thrones. There's, I would say, 5 receivers, for example, we'll get into it, that are pretty good locks to make the roster. And then a whole bunch of, I don't know what's going to happen, right? So let's hash it all out and see what kinds of things feel different after OTAs. And then when we've forgotten about where our brains were, by the time it's, August and we're doing this again after the second preseason game, then we can go back and look and be like, hey, remember that time when Zamiah Vaughn was kind of hot coming off OTAs? Spoilers. But first, let's talk about QB. Obviously, JJ McCarthy is QB1. Anybody who had any questions about that has definitely had that answered. But the next couple have gotten a little murkier, perhaps. I know the beat's really on this. The Star Tribune people are really, really in tune to this. But so you got Sam Howell, Brett Rippon, Max Brosmer. Choose 3 or choose 2. For a 3-man quarterback room, right? You're probably not going to be practice squatting one of these guys. You have that active game day exemption, so I'm going to guess they're going to want that third QB on the actual 53-man roster so that they can have that extra guy dressed for game day. But chalk would be Sam Howell and Brett Rippon, and then Max Brosmer saying, hey, thanks for being a handoff machine in camp. So Kevin O'Connell actually talked about Max Brosmer. Somebody asked about him. And he went into this big, long thing about how impressed he was with Max Brosmer on the whiteboard. And, with Brosmer being this, really this veteran, and he gets it right away. And he's really worked hard on the whiteboard because he hasn't gotten a lot of chances. And my ears kind of perked up when he said that last part. So the beat talked about this, especially people who have covered Gophers football, right? If you write for a Minnesota sports newspaper and you've covered Gophers football, so you covered Max Brosmer for a while, you're going to be super in tune for sure. But for me, what really stood out in that answer was, well, he hasn't gotten a lot of chances, which is kind of what I thought was going to happen. And that the whole thing is under this context of, well, he hasn't played a lot, but he has been really active in the classroom, and that's really cool. That is how it has to start for him if he is going to sort of topple this really gargantuan status quo. Remember, Kwesi went on a big, long diatribe about Brett Rippon earlier in this offseason as well and said, hey, don't count him out for the QB2 job. It might be that this is a true free-for-all for the QB2 job. Pick whoever does better, right? We'll have everybody take second team reps. Good luck. We'll see how everybody does. It very well could be. And I kind of think that between Howell and Rippon, that is what it is. Those two guys are going to have a preseason camp battle. I would like to see preseason reps for JJ McCarthy. I would not be shocked not to because of the way that Kevin O'Connell constructs his preseason. the actual in-game preseason reps aren't really used as warm-up reps. He's got 2 sets of joint practices that are going to lead that I'll give you the joint practice spiel. I'm going to get this question a lot. You're going to hear this a lot. This is the first time this offseason. For O'Connell, every time they've had joint practices, which is most of his years, the joint practices have been the dress rehearsal. They're not on TV. They're not in an in-game situation. They don't have score bugs, but they are more reps. You get more reps in a joint practice than you'll ever get in a preseason game. And they are just as physical, and that's where he gets the starters really ready to go. It's potentially even a greater injury risk, but that's because it's more reps. That's going to be where he kind of does the dress rehearsal stuff, knock the rust off the veterans, get everybody ready. And then in the actual preseason games, that's about determining questions about your depth, figuring out who does and doesn't make the 53-man roster, and giving young guys a chance to prove themselves. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the preseason become Sam Howell and Brett Rippon, trading blows against each other to see who wins the QB2 job, see who wins the QB3 job, and maybe Max Brosmer gets in. I'm not changing what the chalk that I thought was at QB, but the Max Brosmer thing was interesting. I do think that within that whole big wax poetic, it was confirmed he's not getting a lot of chances. And even if he is ultimately a better quarterback than Brett Rippon, I don't think he's going to get too serious a chance to prove that. And he's going to have to make quite a lot out of not a lot of opportunities. And he's just not that kind of quarterback. He wasn't that kind of quarterback with the Gophers. He was very steady Eddie, and the value of him was in consistency over time, but he doesn't have that time to prove it. So I kind of think he's just camp arm is what I'm getting at. Moving on to running back. Again, I'm not making any major changes here. Aaron Jones, Jordan Mason, Ty Chandler, and CJ Ham, I guess, if you want to count that as a running back and not his own thing. But really, all that means is I'm cutting a couple of undrafted dudes in Xavier Scott and Trey Stewart. Xavier Scott was undrafted, didn't make the Bears last year, and Trey Stewart is an undrafted rookie this year. I think that one's pretty easy. We can probably move right on to the wide receivers. The only thing that would make that weird, I'm probably not going to get the information that I would need to change that until the actual preseason, right? Until you have a time where Aaron Jones, maybe even Jordan Mason are not getting reps, Ty Chandler fumbles the ball or something like that, and then one of these two guys comes in and pops off in the third quarter of a preseason game. That's going to be how that goes down if one of those guys does take Ty Chandler's job away from him. And I kind of think nothing that can happen like drills is really going to do this because they don't really tackle. Running backs, everything looks like a touchdown, and therefore nothing looks like a touchdown. So it's going to have to be the actual live preseason reps, which is, I think, a good argument in favor of giving those reps to your Xavier Scotts and your Trey Stewarts and giving them the chance to prove themselves. Plus, put the tread on their tires. You don't need to give a rep to Aaron Jones. We know what he is, and he knows what he is doing. You don't need to get hit more than a couple of hits on him, and you can get him in the joint practices. Okay, let's move on to the wide receivers. This is, I think, the first part going down this roster where it gets pretty hard. After Jefferson, Addison, Naylor, Ty Felton, then you can probably take those four and set them aside. We're not talking about them when we talk about a 53-man roster thing. You get, I think the next two that you would really put in as chalk are Tim Jones and Rondale Moore. Rondale Moore, I still want to see some sort of report that we don't think he's going to start the season on PUP, and I'm going to just sort of pick him up and set him to the side for now, and just not have him be part of this conversation until I know. And I'll say, I'll project him to be on PUP, but really I don't want to make this 53-man roster about whether or not Rondale Moore is healthy. If he's healthy, it obviously changes this. We all know this. We can just move on, right? So I think Tim Jones has a really great chance to be on this roster as the special teams guy that he is. He knows how to make a 53-man roster. There was an Everyman series about him already. You can go listen to. But coming out of OTAs, that would be 5, right? If Rondale Moore doesn't count. So coming out of OTAs, there was a a couple of new and interesting reports. For one, Miles Price is involved in the punt return competition. If he can win that competition, which is a stiff competition, Isaiah Rodgers and Ty Felton in particular make it pretty hard for like a random undrafted like Silas Bolden or Miles Price to like go take it. But those guys do have, every chance in the world to go return one for a touchdown. The other guy muffs one in a practice, and suddenly the job is yours. That could be something interesting. But everybody kind of noticed Jayshon Jones, second year undrafted guy, fascinating everyman series from last year, by the way, if you want to go dig it up. I think if I recall, I really liked his, but he showed up. It looked like a little more muscular, a little bit more, kind of ready to compete, and maybe as a more serious threat to make the roster. Elsewhere in this room, I just kind of want to mention again that it sounds like Ty Felton's role being sort of cordoned away to special teams is pretty much the official plan here. And anything you get from Ty Felton from scrimmage right now is gravy, but really you're a wide receiver project. You're going to do special teams in the meantime. That seems like the plan for him. It was the worry that I had about the draft pick, and that worry seems to be confirmed. Obviously, I hope we get more than that from scrimmage from him his rookie year, but also if it's just about him needing a year or two to develop, I would be totally fine with that, assuming that development actually happens and we don't just get him, a couple of bubble screens every other week and then call it a good third-round pick. But I shouldn't be too mean to Ty Felton, because as a special teamer, it seems like they do really plan to lean on him quite a bit there. And hey, you know what? It's a living. I should also mention the tight end room. I don't know what's up with Gavin Bartholomew. He missed all of the spring program. He has an injury. They signed Giovanni Ricci to replace him at least for camp. Giovanni Ricci has not made a team in 2 years. I don't think they're signing him to be tight end 3. I think they're signing him to be another tight end to throw to for the third team, because they just need a warm body there. They only have 4 tight ends on the roster, and that's not really enough for camp. You want 5 or 6. So if Gavin Bartholomew is going to miss a bunch of camp, you bring that guy in to just be a camp body, right? But that leaves a beautiful opportunity for guys like Ben Urasek or Bryson Nesbitt to take over that role. I have liked Ben Urasek better than Bryson Nesbitt for my money. But pick your favorite of those guys. But that means that I have 3 tight ends now instead of 4. I had Gavin Bartholomew and Ben Urasek making the team last year. I'm going to take Gavin Bartholomew out of that equation, put him in the same penalty box as Rondale Moore, and say, I'll put you back in this when you're healthy. But for now, that gives me actually an extra roster spot to play around with as we move on. And move on we will here on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. There is a Game 7 coming up of the NBA Finals, and believe it or not, a whole NFL season upcoming. If you want to gamble on it, go check out FanDuel right now. New customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So go to FanDuel.com. Take something that you feel really, really good about, like a super conservative win total or a super conservative same game parlay for Game 7 of the NBA Finals. Whatever you're feeling, for example, you could grab Minnesota Vikings over 6.5 wins, right? Just 7 and 10 is all you need. That's minus 400, but you can get 40 to 1 odds on it by getting $200 in bonus bets if that $5 bet does indeed win. You can check it out at FanDuel. Head to FanDuel.com, place that first $5 bet, and get your $200 in bonus bets if it wins. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Moving along here with the Locked On Vikings podcast, let's continue on. We got the trenches coming up here on this 53-man roster. Again, this one didn't do any changing for me. You have your starting 5 really set up. We didn't know that post-draft. You draft a first-round pick. You always hope, hey, they're going to come in and they're going to take the start. But sometimes you get into OTAs and Lewis Cine is like with the third team and never does better. And not the situation here. Donovan Jackson firmly with the ones, no rotation, nobody's kicking him out. There were a couple of interesting moments of rotation where they took out Ryan Kelly and Brian O'Neill and then put in Michael Juergens and Walter Rouse. That is, that's give the veterans a rest and put the young guys in to get them reps, very clearly to me. rather than, hey, we're doing drive by drive, Donovan Jackson and Blake Brandel. I kind of thought they would be more of a timeshare until one of them sort of rose above the other. But that doesn't seem to be the way that they're handling this. They just have given the job to Donovan Jackson, and we'll see how it works out. But then you have, Darisaw, Will Fries, both of those guys also looking like they're going to be ready close to the start of camp. Seeing Christian Darisaw out there for a day of minicamp was huge. Will Fries also kind of on the sort of track where you're hoping to see him beginning of camp, but they're talking about, oh, that would be great for beginning of camp, not, oh, it would be sweet if we saw him by week 4, right? Like the expectation seems to be set there. So in terms of by the time meaningful football is being played, that feels pretty optimistic. As with all things, we'll have to sit and wait. But it's a different situation than like Rondale Moore or Gavin Bartholomew, where it's like those guys might be like real hurt, and we don't know if they're going to be here this year. Doesn't seem to be the case with these two guys. But that leaves us with our backup O-line. And again, I think it's pretty easy. You have Juergens and Rouse, Blake Brandel, Justin School, who took the reps for Christian Darisaw on all the other days. And Blake Brandel took the reps at right guard and then also moved to left guard, I'm going to assume, with the second team. Which, I mean, again, the cuts you're making here are not really difficult sells. There's Joe Huber, Logan Brown. Those are a couple of undrafted guys that some people were excited about. Zeke Correll, another NC State center. If you don't like Michael Juergens, you want to cut him for an undrafted guy, that would be your dude. They just added Vershawn Lee, who was as an undrafted guy on the line. They've added a couple like randos to this undrafted line, but like really Henry Bird, I think, who's like a practice squad mainstay for the Vikings at this point, is probably the toughest sell for like cutting one, and it's not a tough sell. The tough sells are on the defensive line. Oh, baby, it's tough to figure out the defensive line. So let's count them off. You have Jonathan Allen. By the way, listen to yesterday's episode of the Everman, or Wednesday's episode of the Everman series. You have Javon Hargrave. You've got Harrison Phillips. We can probably lock those guys in. I'll talk about the edge rushers later, but I'm talking about the interior guys right now. So then you have Taki Taimani, Jalen Redmond, LDR, and then Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins. I am going to move him to this with the revelation of like actually having watched a little bit of tape that guy's not an edge. Putting him at edge and like regularly, I think would be a pretty big misplay. He doesn't have the quickness. He doesn't have the speed getting up the field. He's very much meant to be a kind of 4-tech, take on a tackle, take on a guard, head up, maybe shed the block, be a run defender mostly. The pass rush, I'm not super happy with at all. So at least a pass rush off the edge. But hey, get up there, contain, kind of do the easy job. That can be totally fine as a rotational player. So, and they've actually moved him in with the one. So the Vikings might be a lot more excited about him right now than I am, as anybody would be with all their new draft toys. But we'll see how that kind of lasts as camp and the competitive part wears on. And you go, God, am I really taking Jalen Redmond off the field for this guy, for this, young guy? You kind of have to grapple with that. So that gives us 6 on the defensive line. And then that leaves us with 4 on the edge rushing room that I had before. And those 4 are your principal 3, Grenard, Van Ginkel, Turner. And one of the tougher cuts that I made this year was cutting Gabe Murphy in favor of Bo Richter. I kind of had this really difficult thing. But because we took a tight end out because Gavin Bartholomew is hurt, I can undo that. So give me Gabriel Murphy back on the team. Gabriel Murphy, baby. And by counting Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins as a defensive lineman too, that kind of makes that stand out. So I'm keeping Bo Richter for special teams reasons, and just for like he's a little bit of a preseason warrior that I think can earn that spot, that sort of 5th spot, and also just the kind of guy that would dress on game day and maybe get in, win that Patrick Jones job, maybe even get like a bigger job there. But I also, the coaches have made it very clear that we should expect a bigger role for Dallas Turner this year than he had last year. I think common sense sort of asks you to do that, but the Vikings have just come out and been like, yeah, he's, Brian Flores straight up called him a starter. So you would probably expect a different role. Those are going to be your principal 3, and then you'll kind of have these other 2 guys spelling people as needed in Gabe Murphy and Bo Richter. I don't think I'm making any cuts that are like crazy controversial here. There's a whole bunch of undrafted, Chaz Chamblises. And that is kind of literally it. Chaz Chambliss, Tyler Batty. Those are the two edge rushers that you're not keeping in the building here. So let's move on to the linebackers, where I'm making the same decision that's still a hard decision, which is to cut Brian Asamoah in favor of Eric Wilson and Kobe King. There's actually a big write-up on Vikings.com that just came out about Eric Wilson and the job that he has, the leadership role that he has sort of secured on the Vikings, how he's willing to be special teams, how he's willing to be a backup or a starter, do whatever. And sort of, hey, he's been in the league for 8 years and he's bringing all these young guys along. Ivan Pace is young, right? Kobe King's a rookie. And sort of bringing these, helping to mentor these guys in addition to being a sort of Swiss Army knife for the organization, where he can come in and play linebacker, play a bunch of special teams, do whatever you need him to do. Be a leader, step back into the shadows and mentor younger, more athletic players. And to also be a success story. Eric Wilson was an undrafted rookie that made the Vikings his first year, primarily off of good special teams and a couple of hot plays as a linebacker, and created an entire career after that. So if you are one of these Auburn undrafted rookies, Austin Keys or Dorian Mousey, if you are Chaz Chambliss, if you are Trey Stewart, if you are Ben Urasek, you're looking at that and saying, this is how I make my living. He is proof positive that I can actually do it. Now we have to talk about the secondary. I don't want to, but I guess we're going to. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. All right, there's been a little bit more clarity on the secondary than we had going in. For one, I was very, very, very sure that a new corner would join the team eventually. I still think that is a likelihood, but I'm no longer certain because the Vikings have, and Brian Flores in particular, has really hinted that Isaiah Rodgers is the corner, is the CB2. You've got Isaiah Rodgers and Byron Murphy. Those are your two guys. That's a new opportunity for Isaiah Rodgers. You can go listen to, I believe it was last Thursday's episode of Locked On Vikings, to listen to how that came to be. But we'll see how he does in that role, but it does seem that he has it. Byron Murphy, and then you have Mekhi Blackmon and Jeff Okudah seem to be sort of battling for that CB3. And Mekhi Blackmon would probably play on the inside, but they might actually put him in the outside and kick Byron Murphy inside. The Vikings really want to kick Byron Murphy inside, so they might do that and then have Mekhi Blackmon or Jeff Okudah kind of compete to be the guy that takes over for Byron Murphy outside in nickel downs. Jeff Okudah is very clearly part of the Vikings' plans to rotate at corner. I think when he signed, I kind of anticipated that he would be like super depth. I was even like, let's see the contract guarantees. Is he even going to make the team? Because he's at that stage in his career where he went from, bona fide supposed to be, the head starter to a backup that got in and played bad. And it's like, okay, that downward trajectory ain't going to level off just because he's on my favorite team now, right? But maybe it has. They seem pretty determined to give him that chance. They seem pretty determined to have that be part of the equation, and he is, I think, legit battling with Mekhi Blackmon for snaps, while Isaiah Rodgers and Byron Murphy are sort of the main two guys. But elsewhere in that cornerback room, you have Dwight McGlothern, you have Ambry Thomas, who has started before. Ron Johnson on Minnesota Football Party, big fan of Ambry Thomas. He's a Michigan guy, another Everyman Series guy that I did at the end of an episode. But it's on the playlist. You can go check that out on YouTube. There's an Everyman Series playlist. Go look at it. There's also Jeff Okudah was one of the first ones I did this year. Excellent story there. I sort of penciled Tavierre Thomas in as like an absolute definite make. I'm not 100% sure about that anymore. I didn't hear anything about him from OTAs, and I have a lot of guys on here that I have making the team based off of only special teams. Tim Jones, Bo Richter, and that you can't do you can't do more than a couple of those guys. Because if they're going to make the team on only special teams, they also have to be active. So you really only have 48 or 49 if you count the third quarterback spots for active players, and you really only have room for one, maybe two guys to not contribute from scrimmage before you start eating into the depth that you need and the rotations that you need on positions like D-line and wide receiver that do rotate. So as I have not heard anything about Tavierre Thomas, but people have, all the beats and everybody has sort of pointed out Zemiah Vaughn as like maybe a riser of OTAs. I'm going to put him into this one. I don't know if that's necessarily a prediction I would make if there were a gun to my head, but it does reflect sort of the mood of the hour with the cornerbacks. So the group would become then, it's a 6-man cornerback group of Byron Murphy, Isaiah Rodgers, Mekhi Blackmon, Jeff Okudah, Zemiah Vaughn, and Dwight McGlothern. If that were the group, right, you've got a couple of undrafted dudes at the bottom there, and your sort of principal 4 corners. If that's the principal 4 corners, the Vikings seem more satisfied with that than I personally am. I don't know if you add Stephon Gilmore back to this or trading for Jalen Ramsey, back to this. I still think they very much should, and I certainly would not be surprised at this point. I still think the chance is greater than 50%, but I'm starting to get the argument for why they wouldn't, I guess. It just relies on a lot more faith in guys like Jeff Okudah and Isaiah Rodgers than they've really earned, in my opinion. But maybe they have a scout. Maybe they've got their coaches that are super, super high on these guys, and they're taking that leap of faith. By the way, just to read off the linebacker group, because I didn't do that, Blake Cashman, Ivan Pace, Eric Wilson, Kobe King. I think you could put that together, but yeah. So at safety, Harrison Smith, he's back. Excellent. Josh Metellus, contract coming, shouldn't be an issue. Excellent. Theo Jackson, new contract. Excellent. I have room for one more guy. Once including the specialists, this puts me at 52 players. Jay Ward will be my 53rd. Again, special teams is a big deal here, but it sounds like they actually expect him to contribute a little bit more from scrimmage, be more part of the rotation. If Theo Jackson is becoming the new Cam Bynum, Jay Ward might be becoming the new Theo Jackson, and they really expect that from him. If I'm wrong here, take a look at Mish Powell, who is the only other safety in the building, or for another cornerback keep Tavierre Thomas instead, or Reddy Stewart, or Ambry Thomas, or somebody else that has done a little bit more in the league to kind of take that extra DB spot. And I think Brian Flores' scheme, because of all the invert that he runs, it sort of blurs the line between corner and safety. Safeties do corner things. Corners do safety things all the time. So having, 7 corners, but only 3 safeties is not really that big of a deal compared to if you had 4 corners or 6 corners and 4 safeties. It's not a huge deal because your corner is probably going to know how to play all the safety roles anyways, and is probably going to line up somewhere crazy, and you're going to use all kinds of weird stuff. And if one of your safeties goes down or something like that, you're going to be able to sort of slot in, and you're just going to run more nickel instead of big nickel, and you don't necessarily need 1-for-1 replacements for any injury. They're going to have a lot more flexibility there. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the numbers get kind of wonky on the secondary. In terms of the specialists, I'm not doing any hot takes here. Ryan Wright, Will Reichard, Andrew DePaola. Sorry, Oscar Chapman. Sorry. I think Isaiah Rodgers and Ty Chandler remain the 2 returners. I think Isaiah Rodgers is going to return punts unless they decide that he's too important to the defense. Then they'll give that to Ty Felton. And then I think for kick returns, I kind of think they're going to keep it to Ty Chandler just because Ty Chandler is safe, but I wouldn't be surprised to see them give that to Isaiah Rodgers as well. There is still very much some discomfort for me here. I have Jayshon Jones and Zemiah Vaughn and Bo Richter all making the team and not really expect. There still is a depth problem here where some years of the Vikings, you feel like you're cutting good players all the time. And I don't really feel like I'm doing that. There are a lot of these that are pretty easy. All I'm doing is cutting undrafted rookies or futures contract guys or guys that are, well past the point in their careers where they can expect to make a team every year. You're not cutting provenly rosterable guys a lot, and certainly far less than usual, which is an argument to say, hey, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe they still are very much going out and getting a corner, which is something I very much want them to do. I think that this room is not inspiring right now. This room is the weakness on the team right now, this cornerback room. It is the thing that looks most likely to sink them, not necessarily even because those players will get burned, but because those players are going to be cover 2 all the time because you can't trust them to do anything, and the Vikings are just going to be a zone defense, and then suddenly our zone's going to get shredded. And then y'all are going to start asking, why don't they play more man coverage? And I'm going to be like, because that would mean Jeff Okudah has to cover Amon-Ra St. Brown, and you don't want that. So that feels like where this is headed if they don't bring in another corner. I really think that they should. Just listening to them on the podium, I am no longer convinced that they will. I hope I'm wrong about that, because I think it would still be really, even if that guy's Stephon Gilmore geriatric, or if it's, Shaq Griffin, somebody that makes it so that one injury in the cornerback room does not constitute an emergency. But right now, one injury in the cornerback room and you are rotating in primarily special teamers. You're rotating in Nudie McGlothern, or if you don't agree with me about Zamaya Vaughn, it's Ambry Thomas or Keenan Garber, or like, I could keep naming names at you, but you're not going to hear someone that inspires you. And you're kind of one injury away from needing that guy to get pressed into action. So I still don't think this room is complete. I still kind of think that if they roll into week 1 with this room, it's a pretty irresponsible thing, and I'm going to be pretty loudly critical of it. But we'll see if they make something out of that. Add Shaq Griffin into this room, and I'll get a lot quieter about this. I still don't think it's a great room, but at this point, I'll start calling it below average instead of like probably one of the worst cornerback rooms in the league. You kind of got Byron Murphy and a bunch of guys that haven't proven anything. So I don't know. Maybe everybody will play way better than I think, but it's a concern. I will talk to you all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.